we rearrange our brains and we start to eliminate the not so useful synapses and get more efficient. And so rather than erosion of skills, to me, I see it as a focusing that we really start. It's a bit like when you're prioritizing something, you realize you've been distracted by something that really isn't moving you forward to where you want to be, and you drop it, right? You just say, okay, I can't do this anymore. Maybe you back out of a commitment that you've made because you wanted to help someone out, and you realize that it just really is sapping your energy and you're not doing the best for them or yourself. But that we do this efficiency thing as we get older and we get more focused and we understand better what gives us a sense of fulfillment.
Hey, welcome everyone. We are back with another episode. Sune and I have a special guest today, Ruth Pearce, who is a speaker and executive coach. Welcome, Ruth. Really excited to have you here and have a great conversation.
Thank you. It's really great to be here.
I came across Ruth as part of my work with PMI, with the New York City chapter. We brought Ruth on as a speaker for our programming, and she did a fantastic job with a series of webinars that we did for our Career Development Network. And yeah, so I've been in touch with Ruth. Recently read her book, which is fantastic. And so I thought she would be a great guest to have on the podcast, given what we talk about. And, we talk a lot about meaning and purpose. So I think Ruth is a great fit for those kinds of topics. So yeah, Ruth, why don't you give us kind of like a brief intro on you and your background and kind of what you brought you to this journey as a coach.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, the short version is that I was a project manager in corporate, mainly financial services, for longer than I care to admit to. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And in 2016, a little earlier than that, I had a rather spectacular burnout incident where I think everyone else had noticed that I was burning out, and I was the last one to know. And I found out by standing up in a CEO's meeting and addressing him in a less than graceful way. Let's just put it that way. And I became fascinated by what was the journey that I hadn't noticed I was on. Where was I making decisions? What kind of choices had I been making that led to that moment? That, yes, absolutely, I completely believe that environments affect us, that you can work in an environment that really undermines you, and there's all sorts of contributors. But along the way, we make choices. And I became fascinated by what is that choice set that meant I went from having a job that I was passionate about to having a job that burnt me out and got me to a point where I didn't really ever want to talk about project management or projects ever again. So I set off on this journey of coaching and therapy and all sorts of things to try and understand how this had come about, positive psychology, all sorts of things. And so here I am, all these years later, I'm coaching people to help them avoid experiencing what I've experienced. I typically speak to and coach people they look great on the outside, but maybe on the inside, they're feeling a little lost or dismayed or disengaged. And really with the idea that no one should have to experience what I experienced.
And I want to talk a little bit about that burnout. So there's a quote from your book where you talk about unmasking, and I wanted to get your view on what you see, what you think is the differences between what you describe as an unmasking, this burnout that led to an unmasking, versus change, or do you think it's like kind of the same thing?
Oh, no, I did. So I definitely see it as different because one of the things I became aware of, especially as I did the work after the burnout experience, was that, as I say, I started off in a role that seemed to be made for me. And for a period of time, everything was going along well. And then I started to see signs based on the feedback I was receiving and the interactions I had with other people. The signs were there that this was not as good a fit as I thought it was. And instead of me evaluating and saying, okay, this isn't a great fit, I started to adapt myself and my behaviors and my expectations to fit in with the environment I was in. And it got to a point where I almost feel like it was my body or my nervous system or something said, enough is enough. And I stood up, made this somewhat inappropriate comment in a meeting without ever thinking about it. Some part of me that was feeling shut down or squashed, maybe it was my integrity or something, compelled me to stand up and say what I was really thinking instead of what I'd been telling people I was thinking. And so to me, that was the unmasking. It's like, here's the real Ruth and what she really thinks. And I think that's different than change in that it wasn't that my experience changed and I changed my mind. It was, or that, I experienced some sort of change. It was that I got to a point where I couldn't keep that behavior up that was required of me in order to fit into the organization.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Ruth. I think it's also, I guess, somewhat determined by your tenure, your self awareness, your level of agency, your level of kind of understanding of yourself. And if we're going through our first job, second job, first few years in a job, I think that's probably a good quality to have. That you do adapt, that you're open to understanding what is it like to work in whatever environment that you're in. And I think that it takes a while for all of us that have been on this journey as we get into our, let's say multiple decades of experience at work, to have that level of like, well, I don't have to stand silently by this environment or this expectation that someone has of me and compromise on, let's say, values. And that's like an easier line, I think, to cross. But what have you seen in terms of people progressing from that, like, hey, I'm a new employee and I want to show flexibility to be a good team player, versus then transitioning to kind of what you're saying of getting the sense of burnout because the people around me, the organization, my leaders have expectations that don't align with what my goals or my objectives are. And how do you find that sooner and how do you find that right balance? So lots there to unpack. I'll let you take it whichever direction you
Yeah.
want.
How long have we got?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I've been doing some work recently with the nervous system economy, which was founded by someone called Shannon Eastman. And we often talk about the the sort of phases of our lives. So like from 0 to 40, we're kind of in experimentation mode. And so that experience of going into jobs, our first, as you said, our first, our second, our third job, there's an experimentation process that I believe goes on where we try on those hats. Someone says, this is how you should behave. This is what's expected of you. This is what the role entails. And we try on that hat and have a little experiment to see how that works. And we're collecting data, right? And at some point, and I think arbitrarily I'm picking the age of 40, at some point you've done enough of that experimentation, you've got enough feedback, you've seen and experienced enough things to be able to say, when this happens and this happens, I'm not at my best. You start to understand more clearly what your values really are, what matters to you and what doesn't. So one of the things that kept me in that role was tremendous loyalty to my team members. Now that's a value that's still there, always was there. It was there throughout. And at some point, what the shift was I realized that I was being loyal to them at the detriment of myself. And I think I had to have a certain amount of experience and a certain amount of experimentation to be able to recognize that. And in actual fact, I don't think I did recognize it. As I say, I think my body was just like, enough is enough, stood me up and made these words come out of my mouth. And no one was more surprised than me. You could hear a pin drop after I'd made my comment. But I do think it is that we've collected data over all of that time. And that early part is very experimental and uncertain. And does this fit? Does this not? And then at some point, you kind of lock into what your identity is and you start to be more certain of, this fits with me. This doesn't fit with me. This is something I can sustain. This is not something I can sustain. This is something that I will do for a short period of time. But if it continues to be expected of me, then this doesn't work. And then, of course, some of it is just the position I was in at that time meant it was not a life catastrophe for me to stop working in that job. Now, some people don't have the liberty of saying, this is taking too much out of me, because they don't have the means to just walk away from something, right? So there's a privilege there that I had of when I reached that point, not having made that comment, not having to go back to them and sort of beg them to see me differently and please forgive me. And, I didn't mean to do it. I could just embrace it and say, well, yeah, actually, this is what I've been thinking all along. And where do we go from here? So there were all these factors that to do with my age and the resources I had and the experience that I had, that had I been 30, I would not have had the liberty to be able to say, yeah, actually, what came out of my mouth is pretty much what I meant to say.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like when you're in your like so much is dependent upon those earlier stages in your career to have the luxury then in your later careers to be more particular and more selective with which roles you want to use your skills towards. And so setting yourself up in early careers where you're building a lot of transferable skills, trying on different masks that you're trying to figure out, like as you're trying those masks on, you're trying to create skills that allow you to have more optionality. And I love that. I love both concepts of the masks and then the unmasking and then the experimentation. And it literally is like I'm imagining, even like thinking back to the early stages of my career, like I would try on to like, did I like sales? Did I like project management? Did I like, operational, rigor? Did I like accountability? Did I want to deflect accountability? And like you almost I feel like when you're in a position where um, you're thinking about those types of qualities in a role, you're naturally going to have more doors that are going to open for you
Mhm.
because it's almost a luxury to even have the ability to think about those things. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that experimentation is so important. And I think the more that you experiment early, the better dividends it's going to pay off with optionality later in your.
Well, it also strangely, this is a weird connection, but strangely, it makes me think of Game of Thrones. Have you each watched Game of Thrones?
Ruth,
It's
not
the
only do
girl.
I watch it, I live it every day in corporate America.
Well, so there's the youngest member of the family who goes off and she takes on masks, literally takes on masks, and she refers to herself in the third person. A girl is hungry, a girl is this, a girl is that, because she wears these masks and adopts the behavior of the mask that she's wearing, and they're people's faces. I mean, it's pretty gruesome. But it's that same concept, right? Of I'll try this face on. And how do I feel when I'm wearing this face, when I'm wearing this role, when I'm wearing these behaviors? This one feels okay, that one doesn't. The difference is underneath, we're not a girl or a woman or a man, we're us. And eventually we have to say, this mask is suffocating me, and do something before it's too late. But I was also thinking of something else that you were saying was it's the practice we have. So several years before that happened, I was working full time and studying for my law degree. And I was working full time as a contractor. I had always communicated to them that come a certain point in my law degree, I was going to stop working so that I could study to take the bar exam. And that point came. I'd kept saying this is what's going to happen, and I gave them 3 months' notice as a contractor, knowing that they could fire me today.
All
But
right.
I said, I just want you to know, 3 months' notice. Let's do a proper handoff. The time has come, and one of the senior people in the organization called me a traitor and said he was going to sue me for breach of contract. Now, I'm in the middle of a law degree, so I'm just like, no, you're not, because contractually, either one of us can call it. I had to give 2 weeks' notice. They didn't have to give me any notice. And I said, and it was out of consideration that I gave you 3 months' notice so that you could make a plan and that I can get someone ready to take over my role and all of that. So I'd had that practice of standing my ground in what was to me a very hostile experience. Someone turning around and calling you a traitor and saying they're going to sue you is pretty undermining, let's say. But I had the resources then because I was doing a law degree saying, no, that doesn't work. Well, that was great practice. That was an experiment. Could I stand my ground? Could I push back on someone? So that then a few years later, when this happened, that is part of the reason, it's one of the many reasons that I was able to embrace what I'd done rather than try and walk it back and apologize and say, I need some mental health leave and then everything will be fine. And instead, I was just like, we've reached the end of the road. And I'm sorry I had to deliver that message in that way. I wouldn't have chosen to do that. But here we are. So how do we move forward? What do we do next? How do we set up for the next phase?
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit, Ruth. You talked about this experimental phase we go through where we're kind of trying on these different masks. You would think that that would be a process of self-discovery where, ideally at the end of that process, you end up where you're supposed to be. But and I mean, I've seen this. I don't. I'm guessing you have as well, but you can contradict me if that's not the case. But a lot of people end up in the wrong profession, right, or doing the thing that they are not suited to do or that they don't enjoy. Where do you think we go wrong?
That is a big question, isn't it? I think there are many, many factors that play into this, but one of the biggest ones is social pressure. Depending on your own personal experiences, and again, I have to thank Shannon Eastman of the nervous system economy for some of these insights because she's really helped me over the last year to make sense of what I had discovered by trial and error. Now in a better position to say, oh, that works because of this and that doesn't work because of that. So, I want to give credit to her because I wouldn't be saying some of these things without the interactions we've had. But I think for a lot of us, there's a tremendous amount of expectation that's placed on us by family, culture. There are expectations about what you will and what won't do, what roles are seen as valuable, and what roles are seen as trivial. And I choose that word deliberately. We've all seen the sort of examples of parents who've said, "What do you mean you want to be an artist? What's the point of that? What's the value of that?" Or whatever. I think because this first period of our life is very experimental, those influences are sort of disproportionately strong. And it takes a long time before you realize that you've been taking the advice of other people, you've been following their recommendations, you've been satisfying other people's wants and actually that's doing you a disservice. So that's another reason why very often I'm working with people who are 40 something, who are in a certain position, and now they're going, how on earth did I end up here? And what on earth do I do next? Because they followed the path. I went to university. My parents were the first in their families to go to university. Well, then their expectation became that their kids would go to university. It never crossed my mind not to go to university because they'd made such a huge step in coming from families where that just never happened. Half of them didn't even finish high school, that it became an expectation. And was I going to disrespect them by saying, no, university is not for me? They've worked so hard to make that something that was within reach, right? And it worked out for me, but not without a lot of bumps and hiccups along the way. And I think there are a lot of these things where culturally and family history and the desires of our parents and everything influence the direction we go in. And it takes a long time before the pull of those things starts to diminish. And our own experience and experimentation starts to let us know that maybe we've been choosing the wrong things. And sometimes our priorities just change, right? We choose things because we're raising kids. The kids leave home, and suddenly it's like, you know what? I don't have to do this awful job anymore just to make ends meet because they're taking care of themselves now. So there's all of these circumstances that change over time, just as over time we get to know ourselves better and start to recognize when we've gone wrong.
Do you think that there's a certain personality trait that also impacts this, like sort of predisposition on whether, you're controlling the world around you or whether the world around you is controlling you? And do you see different, and if we kind of use those as two archetypes of the way you view the world, right? Like, do you see both of those personality traits or both of those sort of archetypes kind of hitting that same point in their 40s? Or do you see the person that sort of, hey, this is my life. This is the way I'm going to lead it. Somebody that is very, like, I don't know, let's say very confident and very sort of knows exactly, like, I want to be an actor or an actress and like just goes for it. And then they hit their 40s and they're like, oh, then they have a cathartic moment and say, well, this isn't really what I wanted to do. Versus others, or maybe the large majority of us who are really sure what we want to do. We go to university, we think we're going to have some inspiration, but we sign a social contract that says, hey, when I graduate with this degree, I will be gainfully employed above an individual that did not go down this path.
Hmm.
And just, I'm very curious more about how you see those two, personality types kind of playing out when they hit that moment of, did I make the right choice or not?
Hmm. Well, it's interesting you asked that because with the number of people I've coached, I've come to be aware that what we perceive as personality types are just responses to our context. That's my perspective. I mean, I don't want to get too deeply into the psychology because I'm not a psychologist, but we often look at people and say they seem confident, they seem definite in what it is they want. And then if you actually sit down with them and talk to them, they're no more certain than the person that they're sitting next to. And then other people who've sort of gone along in this experimental way, they actually come to a point, I think, like I did, where I valued the breadth and diversity of my experiences, including things like for the first 20 years of my life, I blamed my parents for being my parents kind of thing and the things that they handed down to me, in effect. Now I look back and I'm like, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without having had that experience of them as parents, without experiencing them to being tremendously capable and smart and being the kind of people who could be the first in their family to go to university and yet being incredibly anxious. My parents grew up in the Second World War. My mother experienced being evacuated. She experienced years of privation, I suppose, because of rationing and things like that. Her father died at the end of the Second World War. All of these things that made her life feel very uncertain. She communicated those to me. And that makes me a better coach. That makes me a better speaker. That makes me more confident about saying, yeah, there are some days where I feel terrible too, and being able to normalize it. So I think the person who's very certain gets a shock at the 40-ish age to go, maybe there are other possibilities. And maybe I made some of these choices in spite of people who wanted me to do something differently. And then the ones who've kind of looked as though they've kind of bumbled along, it comes together and they see how the threads tie together and see what they can do with that next. So I think it's two sides of the same coin, is that there comes this realization that maybe some of the assumptions we've made and the choices we've made and the things that we've said to people in the past were ill thought out and based on ignorance.
Yeah, I guess we see some of that even in like celebrities or professional athletes that we follow where at a very young age they've decided this is going to be their path. And those that I feel like there is something that when you reach the, let's say, the ultimate height of success in any craft, trade, job at a high level, which is either recognized through who your competition is and that you've won in some discrete competition, or I guess in a capitalistic society, the size of your bank account. But you have to, like, even in those situations, once you've reached the pinnacle, it's either one, reinventing yourself, like we see many professional athletes do that, if you are going into broadcasting or if you go into entrepreneurship or media or whatever you decide to get, as your second career or second mountain. I'm very interested on how that whole kind of progression goes. Like once that chapter ends, when you look at your capabilities and how they evolve, both whether you're as an athlete or even as any job that you're doing, I feel like something does happen in our fees where we're able to, I think, become better pattern recognizers because we have the experience, we have more perspective because we've lived long enough to have that perspective. But there is some level of skill erosion, physically, mentally as well, because that's the way that our cells in our body just age. That's biological, and so there is this other element of like, what are you like passionate about? What do you get joy out of? Versus what are your abilities saying you can and can't do, and then finding that right intersection that complements. I don't know. I'm curious on how you see that playing out, and how do you kind of balance that evolution of your abilities as well as your desire to continue to recreate or reinvent yourself.
Well, and again, it's really interesting that you raise this question. A friend of mine told me the other day that she had just read an article. So I can't tell you what the article was or who authored it or anything like that. But she repeated to me and she said that she was listening, she hadn't read an article, she was listening to a podcast where a doctor was describing the various points in your life where there are significant changes. And one of the things they were talking about was the sort of in the 40 to 50 range, we rearrange our brains and we start to eliminate the not so useful synapses and get more efficient. And so rather than erosion of skills, to me, I see it as a focusing that we really start. It's a bit like when you're prioritizing something, you realize you've been distracted by something that really isn't moving you forward to where you want to be, and you drop it, right? You just say, okay, I can't do this anymore. Maybe you back out of a commitment that you've made because you wanted to help someone out and you realize that it just really is sapping your energy and you're not doing the best for them or yourself. But that we do this efficiency thing as we get older and we get more focused and we understand better what gives us a sense of fulfillment. And then I just think it's also very complicated.
I like
So much of it is, I mean, I feel like in the last half, most recent half of my life, I have learned so much about the things I blamed my parents for, and I would be okay if they had not been this. And now I realize that, that may have been reasonable for me to say when I was 15. But by the time you're 45, you've got a bit more free will and you've had the opportunity to experience other things and do things differently, right? And so there's this whole shift of maybe taking more responsibility for yourself and realizing that the choices you make are your choices within bounds, because obviously, some people's choice range is far greater than someone else's. But you start to have this sense of, maybe it's that transition you were talking earlier about, the people who think, the world is controlling them and the people who feel that they can control the world. Maybe there's this shift towards, well, you know what? Now I understand which things I can control. And I also understand which things I can't control. And we start to get that wisdom of knowing the difference and focusing on the things that we can change.
I am going to steal your focus and efficiency of our brain synapse performance and reframe my question and not say an erosion of skills. It is an evolution of our skills and the way our brain evolves. So I like that. I'm going to use that. It's a much more.
Well, and I was thinking of something else when you were saying about, as some of these things diminish and you use the sort of example of athletes, there definitely comes a time, and I think sadly, Lewis Hamilton is going through this time at the moment in Formula One racing, which happens to be a passion of mine, is there comes a time where your capacity to perform at that peak ebbs away, right? We've seen it with Federer. We're seeing it with Djokovic at the moment, is that he can have a really great competition and then he's injured for 3 weeks. We see all of that. And yet, I also see that when the time is right, you can take on things physically that you've never taken on before. And for me, I used to do mini marathons and things like that until I was in my mid 30s. And then I kind of drifted away from the exercise thing because it got a little tedious. We've now got 5 acres of property that we're gradually turning into a farm and growing things, and I'm experimenting with I'm lifting more things and moving things around and all of this. I feel more physically active than I have in years. Now, in theory, as I'm getting older, I've got less physical capacity, but because I appreciate the beauty of being able to do these things, of being outside, of feeling the sunshine on my face, not right now because North Carolina's so cold at the moment, but feeling the sunshine, getting the fresh air, doing breath work outside, in the fresh air as opposed to doing breath work sitting in a dusty room somewhere. I'm able to direct more attention to physical activity, even though in theory I'm less capable of physical activity than I've ever been in my life. So I think it's all this sort of, we can all reach for things and strive for things and experiment. We can still carry on experimenting with things and find out what we can still do and what we can't still do. And how do we adapt? How do we adapt what we do to make it manageable with the resources that we still have left?
No question.
So, Ruth, I want to talk a little bit about your book. I always remember forget the order. Be hopeful, be strong, be brave, be curious. So one of the things I really liked about it is for someone who hasn't experienced coaching or gone through that process, I think it's a really good primer on what that whole process looks like and what it is and what you can expect as you go through that process with a coach, or even starting the process or looking for a coach that's a right good fit for you and what you should look for, all of that kind of stuff. But I think I'm sure there are a lot, I mean, myself included, there are a lot of people who, aren't aware of what that relationship can be. So imagine I'm a skeptic. I come to you and what can I get out of the coaching? I guess I'm asking you to pitch it and sell it to me. What can I get out of the coaching relationship that I couldn't do with like mindfulness and journaling as a process of self discovery?
That what another great your questions are so great. So one of my friends and colleagues describes coaching as an acceleration process. He basically claims, Robert Wasdina says, that there isn't anything you get to in coaching that you couldn't get to by being mindful and journaling and all of that. But if you want to do it with any kind of pace, and I think of the pace of neuroplasticity, that for us to hasten our own evolution is really hard. But if you get that outside resource, we can help you evolve more quickly. And I think of it in terms of different roles. So, if you go to a consultant and say, this is what I want to accomplish, they say, this is what you need to do. If you go to a mentor and say, this is what I want to accomplish, they say, this is what I've done to accomplish something similar. If you go to a coach and say, this is what I want to accomplish, the coach is going to ask you questions like, well, why is that important? And how will life be different when you have accomplished this thing? And what have you accomplished in the past that was similar that teaches you how you might go about this? And what information do you have or not have that maybe you need to, beef up the information? And what very often happens in that process is people realize that they've been aiming for the wrong thing. All too often, people will come for coaching and they say, this is why I've come for coaching. And when you start breaking that thing down and peeling it back, they realize that actually something very different is going on. And something very different is driving them to try and make change or whatever it might be. So, for example, I had a coaching client that was sent to me as to be coached as part of his leadership development process. And the organization and the individual had very specific goals to get from the coaching. And this person had had a a deeply disturbing personal experience in the last year. And I'm not a therapist and I don't do therapy. But what he came to realize in the coaching was what was getting in the way of him moving to the next level in leadership was he had not fully dealt with what had already happened. And what we focus on is forward looking. So I'm not going to sit there and say, well, how did that come about and what was it and all of this kind of stuff. But what we could do was map out a plan for how was he going to start moving forward from where he currently was. And it's very empowering because it very much is based on normalizing people's experiences, because a lot of us go around thinking, in fact, practically all of us go around thinking that what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm doing is me being broken and not the common state of humanity. And we also explore what capacities you already have, what strengths you already have that you can build on. So that starts to build confidence and self belief. We can help you identify where are the gaps that you want to fill. And do those gaps actually need to be filled? Informational gaps, almost certainly, yes. But if you're feeling like you should be more a certain way, we can often eliminate that. And so we really build up this whole 360 picture of what it is you are going to do in order to give you agency. How are you going to be the person you want to be, do the things you want to do? What are the steps you need to take? And it makes that shift again from, am I going to wait until the world delivers it to me, or am I going to take steps to make it happen? And that's one of the reasons why I start with hope, is because how many times do you hear people say, I hope so? Is this going to happen? I hope so. And there's all of the adages like, hope isn't a strategy. I actually think hope can be a strategy if hope is tackled in the right way. So hope is that combination of a visualization of where you want to go or who you want to be. Then there's the consideration of what routes might get you there. And they can vary from the most ridiculously unlikely route to something that's actually, pretty practical. And all of those pathways are useful to consider because to me, very often, it's the ridiculous one that we dismiss. It's the one that makes us go, but this is what I could do. This is a pathway I could follow. And then there's the agency, the belief that at least in some small way, you can do things that make that outcome more likely. So it's very active hope. It's based on Rick Snyder's work and Shane Lopez's work about what hope really is, that it's these three components of being able to visualize what you want, being able to identify pathways to get there, and then identifying steps you can take and make choices over, and not just leave it to fate that, it's going to arrive. And then we move on to what strengths do you have already? So how do you tackle very often I have leaders and they'll say, what strengths do I need? I work with character strengths from the VIA Institute on Character. And people will say, as a leader, what are the perfect strengths to be a leader? And my answer is always your best strengths used in the optimal way. Leadership was never one of my highest character strengths. If I take the VIA character strengths assessment, leadership is somewhere in the middle. But the things that were at the top, like appreciation, bravery, fairness, gratitude, curiosity, I could blend those together to be a certain type of leader. I was appreciative. I would recognize people's contributions. I've always been someone that gives credit where credit is due rather than claiming the credit myself. I want people to feel like they're equally respected. Fairness is very important to me. I'm brave enough to have tough conversations and not just sit back and avoid them. All of those things are part of the components of my style of leadership. And someone else's leadership is going to look different because they're led by love and kindness and judgment and whatever it is, that leadership style is going to look different. And then the bravery piece, we look at other people and say, they're brave. And we tend to think of people who run into burning buildings or soldiers or whatever group we might think of. It tends to be physical bravery we're talking about. But there are so many ways that we're all brave, showing up to be a parent day in, day out. I think is one of the bravest things anyone can do because it is so uncertain and so unpredictable and so relentless. You never get to go, I'm taking 2 days off being a parent. You're a parent all the time and forever. Even when your kids become adults, there's still a relationship and a dependency and an expectation and all of that. And then curiosity. When you see people use curiosity instead of being judgmental, when you see people being open to the possibility that there's something new to learn, when you hear someone that you fundamentally disagree with say something, and instead of you saying you're an idiot, you know, how could you possibly think that? If instead of that you say, well, tell me more about that because I don't understand that perspective, but I want to. I want to understand how you have that point of view. It changes everything. So that's why I focus on those four things in the book, is because there are so many other things we can focus on. It's not a one size fits all, but I think those are great starting points, that making hope an active thing, recognizing the strengths that you already have at your fingertips and leveraging those effectively, not overusing them, not underusing them. I actually blame my burnout on the overuse of some of my strengths, and I'm about to write something about that. Um, and then that recognizing that we're brave in all different kinds of ways. It might be brave enough to show up. It might be brave enough to stand and speak even though you're afraid of speaking in public. It's all of these things. And then, or the psychological bravery of doing something, even though, you're totally uncomfortable doing it. And then, as I say, that curiosity, instead of leaping to judgment, saying, well, hold on, let's pause a second, give me more information so that I can at least attempt to understand where you're coming from.
Powerful stuff. I have, personal experiences with all of those, and I think when you look at just making people feel like almost the power of your individuality is really where the strength of your future comes from, and just knowing that there's I guess by definition when you kind of figure out and try to do your own self assessment of like what qualities or traits do you think you have and which ones do you want to continue to build and develop. Those are also areas that sometimes you might like overstate your ability to have a confrontation or your
Mhm.
ability to be fair. And when those are only tested when the real life examples come your way, and then you can kind of baseline and see like, okay, how really how good am I at these particular traits.
Can I
How
just say
Yeah.
Chirag's point as well about selling coaching, because I got wildly off track, I think. Description there. One of the things that's been really interesting to me is I've been working with an organization to try and develop an AI coaching assistant. And actually, Chirag, you saw one of my early versions of that, and I'm now working with the company. One of the things that has most helped me to clearly understand what coaching is this trying to build an AI coaching assistant. So in the coaching world, particularly if you're an ICF coach, we tend to talk about we believe our client is their own best expert, that they know what they need to know, that we shouldn't be directing them in any way, and that we ask questions to help them to uncover where they want to go, how they want to go about it, and all of that. And that's what we built in the AI tool. It is absolutely phenomenal. The latest version is really, really good at asking questions. But it's a bad coach because it gets stuck in question mode. Well, what would you like to try? What's the first step you might take? Why is this important? All of this kind of thing. It doesn't have the capacity yet to be able to recognize where a nudge is needed. And what coaches are doing all the time is they're constantly monitoring and adapting. No two coaching sessions are the same, even with the same person, because the circumstances are different. What the person's experiencing and thinking about are different. Someone said to me once, coaching shouldn't be hard work. And I could not disagree with that more, because we're listening for things, we're looking for cues, we are hearing shifts in the person's tone of voice. We're noticing when their energy changes, when they feel that they seem to be deflated, when they seem to feel energized. And we pick up on all of those things and help highlight them for the individual so they can start to recognize those things in themselves. And that's one of the things that I think people are finding more and more difficult, is to recognize where they feel sensations, what those sensations feel like, what their reaction is to certain things, to get down to the nitty gritty of we easily say, oh, that just really annoyed me. Well, there are a million varieties of annoyance. Sometimes it's shame related, sometimes it's embarrassment, whatever it might be. And one of the things we do as coaches is help people start recognizing those cues so that we get to a point where they can coach themselves. And to me, when the client says, it's never my goal to keep a client in coaching for the rest of their life or with me for protracted periods of time. When the client says, I really wanted to have a session with you, and then I thought, what would Ruth ask? Or what would Ruth say? They're starting to have a coach in their top pocket. And that to me is always the goal. As I say, it's not to get you hooked in. If you want to coach with me long term, that's perfectly fine. But that's not my goal. My goal is actually to make me no longer needed so that you can do these things, notice these things in yourself and for other people without needing the coach to be there to do it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine it's a whole way of thinking that you have to kind of learn, right? And I mean, you said it before that it's hard work, but I mean, I have to imagine you're in this state of intense concentration because, like you
Yes.
said, you're trying to pick up with all these nonverbal cues and verbal cues and energy and vibes and all this stuff. So yeah, I mean, that I have to imagine that's extremely hard work.
It is. It's exhausting. I can't coach more than 3 or 4 people in a day, and I can't coach more than maybe 10 people in a week to do it properly. I can skimp, but that's not what I aim to do. For me, some of the most efficient ways of coaching are with groups, because I can leverage the observation powers of the other members of the group to kind of cross-pollinate, and so I can actually do more. I can do more with less coming from my own resources. But a lot of people are very resistant to group coaching because it's a very personal thing. Um, yeah, to me, coaching is definitely a process of building resources in the person that they don't currently have to be able to serve themselves, to be able to support themselves through, thick and thin kind of thing, to be able to navigate challenges and opportunities with, as I say, this coach in their top pocket that, you know, they can have a sort of internal exchange with to help them make wise and ethical decisions.
Have you, of the people that have used the AI coach, I mean, is that the general feedback that you've been getting? Is that it can only go a certain distance before they hit those limitations?
Yeah, and it's interesting because for some people, it doesn't feel limited because what they want is a thinking partner to help them plan something out, and so that can be really, really helpful. Then there are other people where they want something more, but also we're working out the sort of human in the loop piece where the AI assistant is going to be able to recognize when to say, "This might be something that you want to sit down with a human coach for because, it's beyond my capacity to pick up on all the nuances and all of that kind of stuff." So really working out, I do not support the idea of people using my AI coaching assistant in isolation. I think it's important that it's part of a coaching program where they are having human coaching interaction with me or with another coach. I know other coaches see it differently, that they want to, produce a sort of clone of themselves or whatever. That is not what I'm trying to do. I'm actually trying to build a tool that will do the things that are least fulfilling to me as a coach. So like doing assessment debriefs and things like that. I don't think it's the best use of my clients' money or my time for us to do assessment debriefs. Those interactions that we have where I am picking up on all of those things and I am investing my energy and you are the only person in the world to me in that moment, that's the value you get from working with me. The other stuff can be done by an AI tool, and I think that's where I'm trying to, divide and conquer. It's like the person who said the other day that she doesn't want AI to do artwork for her. She wants AI to do washing up and laundry so that she can do
Yeah,
more art, right?
yeah,
It's the art of coaching. I don't want to be spending too much time doing the sort of operational stuff as you referred to it earlier. I want to be able to delegate that piece so that people can really get what I bring individually to coaching, which is the ability to see things that they don't.
Yeah, that's awesome, Ruth. I think the development of the AI bots and the AI capabilities to help your clients is great because then you have a resource available, and hopefully if you just need like a quick ping of, hey, I'm not sure what I would do in this situation, you have a tool available there. Um, it's interesting because you must come across examples of clients that you have that you think may need to cross over into something beyond coaching, like something like therapy and all of that. How have you found that balance and kind of drawing the line that says, hey, you know what, this is now beyond coaching. This is something else that you need to seek another professional support and advice in versus things that fall into the realm of coaching, and how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it can be difficult because you may start off with what's clearly a coaching relationship and it gradually drifts over time. So that's something else we have to pay attention to is as the person develops trust in you as a coach, they may start to share things that are beyond a coaching relationship. And you've got to keep monitoring. It's not a one and done or, it's not that you have that first meeting with them and you assess whether or not they're ready for coaching and whether coaching is really what they're looking for. That's a continuous process, which is another thing that makes it tiring, is that I can't just assume that because you were ready for coaching last Wednesday, you're ready for coaching today. And then for me, it's just part of the process of exploring what resources the person needs. So, just in the same way as I might ask them what training they need in order to accomplish some goal that they've got, what people do they need to talk to in order to get insights and information on how to move forward, I'm going to ask them questions about what's most useful to you. And when we get into the realm of wanting to understand why I think the way I do, I'm probably going to, if we're sort of backtracking and looking at what got me here, as not in terms of decisions, but what life influences and things, I'm going to explore more whether or not it's a combination of coaching and therapy they need, or whether, therapy is better. For me, I'm in the moment and forward looking. And as soon as we start to spend too much time looking back on, I do it this way because this is what my parents inculcated into me or whatever. That's not my realm. I can't unravel what's happened in the past. I can only help you go from where you are now to where you want to be. And if you need some sort of clarification, resolution of things that are lingering from the past, that's not what I do. And it doesn't serve you or me for me to try to. So I have a high level of confidence in saying to someone, maybe you need something else or something in addition, because I've always got the best outcome for the client in mind. And I know I'm not the answer to everybody's problem. So,
One thing I want to touch on, Ruth. So going back to your framework of hope, strength, bravery, and curiosity. I mean, the most interesting one to me is curiosity because I think that can make up for a lot, right? So we live in this age of instant answers, right? I I'm constantly fighting with my kids. My oldest has a phone, and we gave it to him way too early, which we learned our lesson, and the other two don't have phones yet. um, but I'll find him, and I'm guilty of this myself, so I don't want to just put it all the blame on him. But as soon as he has a thought, his first instinct is to reach for his phone and look it up. And in this age of where and this goes back to before AI, even of Google and a constant internet, like where we can look up things instantly. What happens to curiosity in that world? Because I think a lot of curiosity is sitting with a thought and letting it brew in your head and making connections that maybe you wouldn't have made before. And it can go the opposite way too. I think if you look things up, it can lead you down rabbit holes, which can be good or bad, right, on the internet. So I'm just curious how you see that, how that will affect curiosity in this new world that we live in.
oh, you don't have any simple questions, you guys, do you? So I really love the work here of Todd Kashdan and his team. He's at George Washington University. And he and his team have done studies that have shown that curiosity isn't one thing. There's actually, I think they're up to 6 facets of curiosity now. But at the time when I was first looking at their materials, it was 5 facets. Because one of the things I see often with people is they say, I'm not curious. And it's because they have a perception. It's like people who say they're not creative because their perception of creativity is you're musical or you paint or something like that. And there's so many other ways to be creative. But people say they're not curious. And when you actually break it down, there might be things about some elements of curiosity that are not appealing to them, like thrill seeking. That's a kind of curiosity. What does it feel like if you do this? What would it feel like if I jumped out of a plane with a parachute? Maybe that doesn't do anything for them at all, but they might be curious about people. And so I think this is one of the things that we can really pay attention to is if we don't make curiosity a generic thing. So for example, when you said about looking things up on the phone, I'm not curious to find out whether if I rack my brains, I can remember the title of that song that David Bowie sang 30 years ago. I just want the answer and I'm going to go and look it up
Yeah.
because it's using a lot of cognitive load for me to try and remember something that I know I can have at my fingertips. Just the same as I can still do long division and multiplication and I can do all the, which I think it's sad a lot of people can't. But for the most part, I'm going to use a calculator to do complex calculations just because it's quicker and easier and more accurate. There's so many ways I can, but I know how to do it. I can still read a map, but I use GPS. It's like there's the efficiency thing. We were talking before about the efficiency. So I think there are times when reaching for your phone can be efficient. If what we want to do, though, is to stimulate thought processes and making connections and that sort of thinking things through and having ideas, then the phone needs to be somewhere else. And we know that when people say they're doing nothing, and this is one of the things I work with my coaching clients a lot, is we're not doing nothing. We're letting our brains do their sort of resetting and rethinking and shuffling and ordering. And some of that is staring blankly into the distance and afterwards saying, I don't even know what I was thinking about. Your brain has been processing stuff, right? And so I think that's where we can focus people to appreciate curiosity and thinking and mulling things over and not just reaching for the phone to look things up because life isn't a series of facts. The phone is great, Google's great for looking up a fact, but it can't answer the question, how will you navigate this challenge? It can make suggestions as to what you might consider, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's making the choice on how you navigate the next challenge or the next opportunity. And it's that curiosity. What ideas can I come up with? What things have I experienced before that might play into this? Who do I know that may be able to help me? Those kind of questions, the who, what, how, which are very coachy questions, are the things that can stimulate that curiosity. Well, how would you go if you didn't have your phone today? How would you go about finding out that answer? Those questions, and people have to start going, "Oh, wow, I guess that's what people did when they used to go to the library, right? Do people still go to the library?" So it's those challenging questions that are about the how do you go about it as opposed to what is the answer to. And I think just not getting too tangled up with the what's the fact, sort of discouraging people from using these tools to look up facts, that's inevitable. But then opening up these other avenues to being curious of, no, well, what did you notice about this? What did you see? When you looked at this thing, what did you see? If you make someone look at something in great detail, things appear to them that they don't notice in the first instance. And I will just say that curiosity, I think, nearly killed me, but it's a bit dramatic, hyperbolic. But I am so curious about so many things that it can result in being completely distracted from anything because I can go down rabbit holes and all of that. So I think that's another thing to be cognizant of is where do you engage curiosity and where do you say, yeah, this isn't the moment for it? Because I can pick up any new shiny thing and get interested in it. You can tell me some interesting fact about nuclear energy, and I will want to spend the next 3 days researching nuclear energy. Not useful. I can't, I'm not going to, it's not that it's useless, but there's so much information in the world that I can't possibly use it all. So I need to come back to that being efficient and being focused. So that balance of being efficient and being focused versus being curious and broad, that's a constant adjustment.
All right, last one for me, Ruth. I'll give you a layup on this one. Um, we've peppered you with some good tough questions, and it's been a lot of fun. So maybe my last one will be a bit more fun. Obviously you're uh working on AI and figuring out ways in which AI is going to impact your craft, your business. What excites you the most about AI? What do how do you see this? What are the tools that you use the most? How do you see this continuing to evolve over the next few years, not just for your profession, but just more broadly? And then, talk about some of the stuff that you love using AI for in general.
That's the layup question. Okay. I hate to see what your difficult question is because I have a very complex relationship with AI. I was at a conference recently, it's a women's leadership conference, and they had a panel about AI. And it ended up being one of the most disturbing panels I've ever been on, not because they were forecasting that AI is going to be the end of the human race or anything like that, but because I realized that it is no longer enough to be interested in AI to get up on a panel and talk about it, that you need to be able to offer more than that. And so it's very complicated to me to answer what I'm excited about because every upside has got its downside. Human history has shown us that every time we invent something incredible, it turns out to be, really detrimental to a certain group of people, right? Everything
Hmm.
can be weaponized essentially. And so I'm excited because I think for people who are already effective at what they do, it is going to really magnify their and multiply their efficacy and the impact they make. For other people, I think AI is going to very quickly identify where their gaps are and where maybe they're not the top of their field. And so I'm worried about how AI is going to broaden the gap between, maybe the haves and the have-nots, the able and the not so able, all of those kind of gaps. And yet at the same time, I'm excited to see what will some of these people who are already pretty amazing, what will some of these people do, accomplish, come up with because they have AI as an assistant. How productive will they be? There are things I've done in the past, analysis I've done, where it's literally taking data and crunching it again, is not the most efficient use of my time because that's not my skill set. That's a mechanical thing that I can only do at certain pace. Well, now AI can jumpstart it. You've got to check everything, obviously, but AI can jumpstart that. AI can synthesize a great deal of information and give you a summary of it to get you kickstarted on a new topic and things like that. So I think it's exciting to me because I feel like it expands my universe and I can tap in, I can be curious about more things to a deeper level than I've ever been able to before. But it also scares me because I do think AI is really going to highlight gaps in people's skill sets. And what we've got to now is everyone needs to be a programmer because it comes down to prompt engineering, right? I can write a prompt. I did it one day. I wrote a prompt inadvertently. I was asking AI to help me map out a plan for more effectively leveraging my website. And it came back and said all these really positive things about my website. And it suddenly occurred to me that I had phrased the question in such a way that I got the answer I wanted. Your website is already fabulous, which I knew not to be true. Then I was able to say to AI, okay, that's great, but what I want the real truth. I don't want all of this, smoke blowing and you telling me everything's wonderful. What are the gaps? And it came up with like 50 areas of things that I needed to change. And so that's both an opportunity and scary too, because I think we're going to fall foul of our own biases more and more because we're going to engineer prompts that reinforce the biases we already have. You're great. It says you're great. Well, then I'm great, aren't I? So it goes around and around in
Mhm.
circles. So I think there's tons of opportunity and tons of pitfalls, and we're just tasting the possibilities at the moment. And of course, it's all moving so fast that by the time wrapped your head again around one tool, there's a new version of it, or there's another tool that's more focused on this, or, does this better, or whatever it is. So one of my favorite things to do is to take multiple tools and ask them the same question.
Love it.
Because it's very interesting to
It
see
is.
how similar they are and how different they are. And I think all of those things are things we need to encourage people to do, is that they may get wedded to a particular tool because it's easy for them to use, it's intuitive, and they don't do that benchmarking of, would another similarly capable AI tool give me the same answer if I asked it the same question? So there's all this complexity for me of how do we set people up to be able to use AI as effectively as possible? We're all worried about, plagiarism and will it write people's essay answers and all that concerns me way less than how do we set people up to be able to prompt the AI to give useful, usable, reliable responses where it can point to where it got the information from, so it's not completely made up, and that we avoid it people pleasing because AI's already been trained to be people pleasers. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for the
Like you said, I think it's super early. I thought of a metaphor while you were where you were talking, Ruth. We're like in the VHS Betamax era, but on crack with all these different options. And I'm really curious to see where we're all gonna land, either the VHS side or the Betamax side.
Yeah, that's right, or maybe something completely different. We'll all be using
Yeah.
Blu-ray or something, I don't know, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's and having that open mind, that comes back to the curiosity of having the open mind of what's possible and what are the potential pitfalls and not get too in one camp or the other. The AI isn't evil, or if it is evil, it's because we made it evil. Let's face it, we created it. It isn't intrinsically evil, but we're already starting to see people blame AI for certain outcomes. And it's like, no, that's a cop out. Someone used AI to reach that outcome. AI didn't sit there and go, well, how can I mess up the human race today? So, not yet, anyway.
Fingers crossed. Skynet hasn't arrived yet.
Wow. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Ruth.
I
I
think
appreciate it.
this
Chirag, I don't know if
hour
you
just
got
flew
a
by. Yeah.
yeah, it was so
I
quick.
think, yeah, it went by really fast, but really appreciate you, Ruth. I think we still left a lot of topics that I wanted to cover, so we definitely need to have you back
I'd
to
love
go
to
over
come
some
back.
more
This
stuff.
is this
Yeah.
is great. I'm more energized now than I've been all day, so Thank
Nice.
you.
That's great to hear.
It's all right. Our AI version's coming out after yours, so
Well,
don't.
how do I know that you 2 aren't just 2 AI bots?
You don't.
And we
You
didn't
don't know.
verify that at the beginning, thinking that, right, they really are you.
I have to give you my NFT token or something to validate my video
Well, I think
feed.
that the fact that you were, sort of consumed with a coughing fit was demonstration that you are a human, 'cause I don't think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
happens
there
today.
we go. Thank God for the mute button.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ruth. This was great. And yeah, we'll continue the conversation another time.
Thank you,
Perfect. I
Ruth.
look forward to it.
All right.
Maybe we'll be on video next time.
Yes, we're
Super
hoping for it. We're gonna convert to video soon.
good goal.
All right. See you next
Cheers.
time.